Oi, tatar, tatar. Kocak lupa matiin. Halo Mine, welcome semuanya. Jadi sebenarnya hari ini bingung mau stream apa. Terus kayak kemarin gue beli course di di Udemy buat belajar flutter gitu. Jadi daripada gue gabut belajar sendiri, mungkin kalau dari kalian ada yang mau ikutan belajar. Oh ya, sebelumnya Flutter nih bahasa pemrograman nih guys. Ini gue pakai BGM aja ya. Jadi sebelumnya Flutter nih bahasa pemrograman. Itu dia bisa dipakai buat aplikasi mobile di iOS sama di apa satu lagi namanya, iOS sama di Android gitu. Jadi ya, ntar nih gue pakai display capture aja deh, jadi gak terlalu ribet. Udah. Jadi gue belajar dari sini guys. Kocak. Apa gue hilang? Itu.
Flutter is all about being able to build apps for different target platforms off a single code base. However, technically, Flutter itself is not a programming language. You're not learning the Flutter programming language. Instead, Flutter is a framework for building user interfaces with Dart, and Dart is the actual programming language. Now, what's a framework? Well, a framework is simply a collection of packages and utility functions and functionalities, and generally speaking, things that you can use in your code. Like, for example, some pre-built code that you can add to your code to make sure that a button is displayed on the screen. That's what the Flutter framework gives you. Now, as mentioned, Dart is the actual programming language you're learning, and Dart is a language developed by Google, which cannot just be used for building mobile or cross-platform apps with Flutter, but to be fair, Flutter is the main use case for Dart. And you use Flutter on top of Dart, so to say, to build these cross-platform apps. The Flutter tooling that's also part of the overall Flutter solution then will translate that Dart code that uses Flutter features to that machine code for the different target platforms, as mentioned in the previous lecture. But technically, you as a developer are not just learning Flutter, but also Dart. But of course, with this course, you will learn both. You need no prior Dart knowledge. Instead, you will learn how to build mobile apps with Flutter, and along the way, you will also learn Dart, so that by the end of the course, you know both. So by now you know that Flutter is a thing you can use to write code in a single code base and translate that code to machine code for different target platforms. Now, Flutter, as you can see, offers a broad variety of possible target platforms. For example, you can build mobile apps for iOS and Android. And initially that was all that was supported by Flutter, and up to this day, I would argue it's still the primary focus of Flutter, or to put it in other words, these platforms are best supported by Flutter, and it is the focus of this course. It always has been, and with this course you will learn how to build mobile apps with Flutter. Now, what you will learn in this course will still help you for these other target platforms, but those won't be the focus of this course. For example, you could also use Flutter for building web apps, that run in modern browsers, because these web apps use certain features that are not supported in older browsers. And you can also use Flutter to build desktop apps for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. But again, the focus of this course will be on mobile apps. If you're primarily interested in one of these other platforms, this course won't be the right course for you. Now, what's really important to understand and know regarding these target platforms is that you can, of course, write the code for all platforms, no matter on which machine you are, because it's one shared code base, it's one code for all these platforms. But when it comes to then actually producing these translated code packages for the different target platforms, you have some restrictions. Most importantly, you can only test and run iOS and macOS apps on macOS machines, Windows apps on Windows machines, and Linux apps on Linux machines. So if you want to build an iOS app on Windows, you can write the code for it because the code is the same. That's one of the main selling points of Flutter, as you learned, but you can't actually generate the app itself that would then be uploaded to the app stores. For that, you need a macOS device. Of course, you can nonetheless write all the code and then just copy that code to a macOS device, to a MacBook, for example, once you're ready to build it for the App Store. But it's worth knowing that on a Windows machine, you can't build those iOS or macOS apps. That's important to know and understand. For Android and web apps, you have no restrictions. No matter if you're on a macOS, Windows, or Linux machine, you can not just write the code, but you can actually also generate the Android or web apps themselves based off that one code base on all these platforms. So now that you know what Flutter is and what you can do with it, it's time to get started with it. And for that, you need to install a couple of tools. In this video here, I'll give you the high-level overview. In the next video, I will walk you through all the setup steps needed on Windows machines. In the video thereafter, I'll cover macOS, and of course, you can skip the lecture that you don't need. If you're on a macOS device, you can skip the Windows lecture and vice versa. Here in this lecture, as mentioned, you get the big picture, and then after those next lectures, where I show you the exact steps, we'll get started creating a new Flutter project is to download and install the Flutter SDK, the Flutter Software Development Kit. And that includes Flutter itself, so this SDK itself, so this collection of tools and this Flutter framework, which I mentioned earlier. But it also means that you will need to install Git, which is a version control software that is generally totally independent from Flutter. It's a software you can use in general as a developer to, for example, create code snapshots to which you can go back if you mess something up in your code, for example. But Flutter, these Flutter tools which you also install, actually use this Git software internally, which is why you will need to install that. Again, I will show you the concrete steps and will show you how to install Git in those next lectures. I'm just mentioning it here already. Now with that, you would have Flutter installed, and that would be enough to write the code. But in order to also build the app for different platforms, and in order to install something, we'll need to install, and you will need to test iOS apps. As mentioned before, for iOS apps, you will not be able to install Xcode on Windows and Linux. You will need a macOS device for that, and that's why I mentioned that you can only preview and really build those iOS apps if you are on a Mac. The code is the same, but these tools can only be installed there. For Android apps, you don't have these restrictions. There you can install and configure Android Studio no matter on which machine you are. Now once you have these platform tools installed, there's just one last missing step, and that would be to set up some virtual devices, some emulators on your system. For example, an Android emulator to preview your Flutter project as an Android app, running locally on a virtual device on your machine. For iOS, you would create an iOS simulator, and I will also show you how to do that in those next lectures. Using such virtual devices instead of your real phone is very useful, because that means that you don't have to use your real phone for testing, and that you instead can use this virtual device, which can also easily be erased if you need to, and which is a great tool for testing your Flutter project as you're working on the code. That's the theory. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at the Windows setup, and thereafter, we'll take a look at the macOS setup before we then In this lecture, we're going to install Flutter and all other extra tools that are required in order to build mobile apps with Flutter on Windows. If you're not on a Windows device, you can skip this lecture. macOS is covered in the next lecture. So now, to install Flutter on Windows, you should visit flutter.dev, the official Flutter website, and there click on Get Started. This takes you to the official Flutter documentation and there to the setup page, and there you can pick the operating system on which you are to find detailed instructions that tell you what to install on your system in order to use Flutter on it. Now here, since this lecture is about the setup on Windows, we are of course going to take Windows as an option, but it's important to understand that on this page you're not picking the platform for which you want to develop, but the platform on which you develop. So here you don't pick macOS just because you want to build a macOS app with Flutter on the instructions. And these steps can be added, so you should always check out this page in addition to the video. And on this page you also get direct links to all the tools you need to download, so therefore this is definitely a must-visit page. Now, when installing Flutter for Windows, there are some prerequisites. For example, you must install Git, as mentioned in the previous lecture. For that, you can simply follow this link on this page here, which takes you to the official Git website. This will now walk all units of all requisite is step, and go back to the official setup instructions. And now it's time to really install Flutter itself. For that, you should download that latest version.
Choose your first type of app. Oh, bentar. If you want to use Flutter in China, what the fuck? Oh, bisa desktop app juga ya? Flutter. Oh, pakai ini aja. Ctrl Shift P. Flutter. Oh, bukan nih. Emang harus install dulu ininya. Bisa and Flutter extension for Discord. Di sini dulu. Flutter. Ini agak bandel sih sebenarnya. sama buat ini. Ya biarin lah. Riwa anjir satunya lagi. Download dua-duanya ya. Download dan install di download yang ini. 1 giga bro. Gila.
Version using that link in the official documentation. And then once this was downloaded, open this zip file that was fetched here and extract it. And in that file, you will find a Flutter folder. Now that Flutter folder must be moved somewhere else. And it's generally up to you where you want to move this, though the official documentation recommends picking a path like this. So here I'll go to my C drive, create a new folder there, which I will name SRC, and paste that Flutter folder from that zip file into this folder. So into this SRC.
Pakai dua-duanya deh. Kita pakai VS Code sama ini. Mana ya? Anjir lama banget loadingnya sumpah. Flutter. Extract. Oh. Extract. 2 giga anjir ternyata. Wah lumayan juga ini mah. Cancel. Nggak jadi bro, nggak jadi. Pakai ini aja.
Folder, which again Flutter folder with the next Flutter folder on your system. You must make your operator you did now install, because it turns out that this Flutter folder which you just copied contains a bunch of tools that will be needed later on. These extra tools, you should search for env in your system search. To edit your system, go there. Now there you should typically already have a path variable. So now must add a new entry, a new value to that variable. And the value of to then you can continue further down to the next error that the getting here is that it can't find the device will be installed studio, and this will open up a configuration wizard since you're starting this for the first time. You just copied around your system search. Now to make your system aware of these extra tools, you should search for env in your system search to edit your system environment variables. Alternatively, you can manually go there through the control panel. So here on this page, you should edit your environment variables, and then there your user variables for your user. Now there you should typically already have a path variable, so a variable called path, but if you don't have it, simply create it. Now I do have it, so instead of creating it, I'll select it and click Edit. And here you now must add a new entry, a new value to that variable. And the value that should be added here should be the path to the bin folder in that Flutter folder you just copied around. So in my case, it's this path, or to be precise, this path, which then includes /bin at the end. So you should copy this path. Now to make yours, you with the next.
Ini nunggu dia ekstrak itu lama banget. Banyak soalnya. Flutter tadi
Next steps. Create a new folder there at which to be steps. By the way, keep these warnings in mind when picking a location for your Flutter folder on your system. So to continue with the next steps, you must update your path, which in the end means you must make your operating system, or specifically the command prompt on Windows, aware of these extra Flutter tools, which you did now in tools that will be needed later on. Should set variables. Alternatively, you can manually go there through the control panel. So here on this page, you should edit your environment variables, and then there your user variables for your user. Now there you should typically already have a path variable, so a variable called path, but if you don't have it, simply create it. Now I do have it, so instead of creating it, I'll select it and click edit. And here you now must add a new entry, a new value to that variable. And the value that should be added here should be the path to the bin folder in that Flutter folder you just copied around. So in my case, it's this path, or to be precise, this path, which then includes /bin at the end. So you should copy this path to this bin folder in that Flutter folder and insert this as a new value into this path environment variable. And then click OK and OK. Now with that done, you can continue further down to the next step and run Flutter Doctor in your command prompt to verify that Flutter was installed correctly.
Holy shit, ini beneran suruh running Android Studio anjing, meninggal aja, cok. Salah, kocak.
So for this, open your default command prompt, which is pre-installed on your system, and in there, run Flutter Doctor.
Bekerja keras lah tuh laptop gua. Ini lagi bekerja ini dia. Lama banget lagi. Nah kan.
Now, if you get an error that the flutter command can't be found, you should revisit this step where the path was updated, because some did the path correctly. So make sure you did enter the right path in the right environment variable if this flutter doctor command fails. Otherwise, this command should work. It still gets some errors in there, and that's totally fine, but it
Masih belum kelar anjir ternyata. Kan udah. Bentar guys, masih installing banget ini. Lah, VS Code-nya udah. Oh, dia kesini ya. Android Studio not installed, what the fuck. Perasaan waktu itu udah diinstal nih. Kok dia main file ya? Tai lah. Sedang stream. Kalau dia begini ya, lucu nih.
should find the chain. So, and then move on to the with downloading Androids. You should.
Kayak Android Studio waktu itu udah pernah diinstal deh. Oh shit. Aduh. Install lagi guys. Android Studio. Males banget cok. Operating system development tools Android Studio ini ya. Aduh hai admin. Download the latest version of Android Studio. Malesnya mobile app tuh gini guys, banyak banget yang harus diinstal. Begitu Android Studio tuh berat sekali, sangat amat berat sekali. Untung cuma bentar downloadnya. kapan hari itu gue uninstall deh, baru inget. Dulu tuh sempet gue uninstall, terus baru gue install lagi sekarang. Ini apakah stream ini akan aman atau tidak? Semoga saja aman, karena saya tidak membuka konten yang bersifat copyright harusnya.
Download Android Studio, and for that, a couple of seconds, installer started. You can start such a keep the remaining steps. This might studio the first time. You can pick any color theme of your choice. We won't use Android Studio for writing code in this course anyways, so it doesn't matter too much. But you should make sure that you do check Android SDK here, that you do also pick an Android SDK platform here, and Android virtual device.
Download lagi coy.
Now in my case, I can't confirm the default.
Meninggal aja banyak banget ini. OTW. Ini mah kayaknya belum nyampe flutternya ini mah. Udah keburu kelamaan di installing ribet ini. Absen bentar kak. Halo Ai, welcome. Gimana kabarnya Ai? Tidak disarankan untuk melihat stream ini sih sebenarnya kalau lagi pusing buat coding, karena ini beneran pusing. Baru nginstal doang. Tapi welcome. Hari ini bajunya semarak banget ya. Ini baju ini kan apa? Para game. Apa sih namanya dulu? Asian Game. Ini baju gratisan. Salah kocak. Kok ini yang gue geser ya? Kok kira stream apa? Enggak main game dulu lah. Hari ini kita mulai produktif. Kita mulai produktif dengan apa? Ngoding apa? Flutter. Banyak banget yang harus diinstal. Gila. Oh, warna-warni. Yoi. Banget. Thank you. Makasih. Apa lagi tuh? Ini tuh Android. Ini course ini sebenarnya. Cuman daripada aku cuma belajar sendiri doang, kali aja ada yang mau kan sekalian nonton. Kali aja kamu berminat gitu, selain nge-develop web gitu kan, belajar Android programming gitu. Kok diketawa ya? Makasih Kak. Aduh. Langsung begini ya. Langsung sekian, terima kasih. Aduh, manu aku pencet tutup. Ya. Gelo nih. Banyak banget ternyata. Diingat-ingat lagi tuh, udah nyampe chapter berapa tadi? Call CSOS. Oh anjir, banyak juga ternyata. understanding material design about this course, running first Flutter app. Kalau bisa sih ntar ujung-ujungnya bikin aplikasi penyewaan lapangan kayaknya dah. Good luck deh, thank you. Gak ngerti. belum ngoding ini, baru bagian install lucu dulu nih. Tuh belum, baru kelar. Welcome to Android Studio, customize synchron with OS. Ya udah, anjing Android Studio tuh apa ya, berat banget guys, malas. ada Flutter sih di sini, tapi kalau pakai Android Studio tuh beratnya seberat-beratnya anjir, seberat-beratnya cobaan tuh Android Studio.
Folder which it would like to use for downloading and storing these SDK files, since I have a special character in my user folder path, and hence I'll pick a different path here.
Android virtual device-nya salah. Yah, kocak, gue tutup. Mana tadi? Ladybug meledak. Edit cast virtual machine. That's all. Customize all setting. Advanced setting virtual. Meninggal anjir, langsung cowok gak kuat ya, langsung meninggal anjir. Udah gak apa-apa.
Continue, accept these license agreements, and finish this SDK Manager by clicking on More Actions, SDK Manager. And here you should for one make sure that you do check that latest stable Android version here under SDK Platforms. And under SDK Tools, you should select the SDK Build Tools and make sure that you also got the SDK Manager.
Oh, more action. SDK Manager. Hah? Oh, sekarang namanya Vanilla Ice Cream. Keren juga. Oke. Android sekarang namanya Vanilla Ice Cream anjir. Gua udah gak ngikutin perkembangan update Android. Terakhir tuh Marshmallow apa kalau nggak salah. Itu versi 9 apa 10 gitu. Itu terakhir kali ngikutin perkembangan Android. Terus habis itu kan HP gue rusak, habis itu ganti ke iOS. Udah cuman ngikutin perkembangan iOS doang, nggak pernah ngikutin perkembangan Android lagi. Ternyata sekarang namanya makin. Oh, udah finish. Okay.
And here you should for one make sure SDK build selected here.
SDK Build Tools. Tadi kocak nih. SDK Manager. SDK. Oke, build toolsnya. Oh, udah.
In addition, the Android SDK command line tools should also be selected.
Android SDK. Command line tools. Nih.
And once you did all of that, you should press apply to make sure that these extra tools will be installed. Again, you will need
Finish.
to confirm some license agreements and walk through these remaining installation steps, which again can take a couple of minutes. But now you should again go to more actions here and go to Virtual Device Manager. And here click on Create Device. This wizard allows you to create a new virtual device blueprint, and the idea behind virtual devices simply is that you have an Android device emulator running on your system to conveniently preview your Flutter app whilst you're working on the code. So here you can pick any template of your choice, like Pixel 6 in my case. Click Next, download the latest Android version here, which again
Pixel 9 lah. Next. Oke. Oke, finish.
can take a short while. Pick hardware if possible.
Dodol grafiknya. Ya, diulang deh. Delete, tambah Pixel 9 Pro. Jangan yang Fold soalnya ntar aneh anjir jadinya. Next. Ini nggak bisa di. Oh shit, nggak bisa diganti ternyata. Finish. Bisa jalanin nggak ya? Apakah emulatornya bisa dijalankan adik-adik? Soalnya ini bakal berat banget nih. Kalau nggak bisa, ya udah, nggak kuat.
Flutter app on a device. For that, you should create a new folder anywhere on your system. The exact path is up to you. For example, on the desktop, on both Windows and macOS, this is a fine folder. And there, create a new folder, for example, called Flutter Projects, written like this. Important, make sure that if you do choose a folder name that consists of multiple words, as I did here, that you use an underscore for separating these words, not a white space, not a dash, but an underscore. And once you created such a folder, you can use that folder to then create your Flutter projects inside of that folder. For that, you can simply open that folder in your terminal, in your command prompt on Windows, or in this case, PowerShell, which it opened for me here. On macOS, you simply open it in your default terminal, and then in your terminal, into this you can Flutter create, for example, first underscore app. Again, if you do choose a name that consists of multiple words, don't use white spaces or dashes in new Flutter project by running Flutter create and then choosing any name of your choice. For example, first underscore app. Again, if you do choose a name that consists of multiple words, don't use white spaces or dashes, instead use an underscore to separate words. And this command will now create a new project folder inside of that folder that you created, where a new Flutter app, a new Flutter project will be created in. So you got a new project folder with a new Flutter project inside of it.
Oh,
and the command is exactly the same no matter if you are on macOS or Windows.
Harus pakai ini kah? Harus pakai CMD kah? Oh, berarti emang harus dari sini karena di VS Code kayaknya belum keinstall.
This will now create a new Flutter app project in a code. For that, you writing your Flutter totally free main systematic command complete code. You can go through you can cut using Dark Plus, but you can of course be a site and there so open it with so that box. Now duration we should add specific extension because VS Code add Flutter Xteam code for Flutter development. Now you should install that, it's totally free to use, and once you install that, you're ready to use VS Code for Flutter development.
Ya udah keinstall kan ya? Udah. Oh. Ini butuh sih.
So now within that Flutter project which you created and with next course section from the ground up. Dart file being replaced, we can use this starting code. Won't tell you much though. That's no also going to learn how to write Flutter and therefore also Dart code from the ground up. This main.dart file here of course already has some code in it so that soon we can see something on the screen. At the moment of course all this code won't tell you much though. That's no problem though, you're going to learn all about this code and much more throughout this course. So now with that main.dart file being replaced, we can use this starting code, this demo code, which I provided to you here, to see a first app running on an emulator. And for that, you should make sure that you have a virtual device, an Android emulator or an iOS simulator up and running. And if that's not the case, a simple way of running such an emulator is to use VS Code and then there under View, choose the command palette or use the shortcut which you see here, which will open this command window here where you can type commands and execute them from inside VS Code. And for example, if you type Flutter here, you'll see some Flutter related commands. You could, for example, also create a new Flutter project here with this tool if you wanted to. But if you then add a bit more context here, and you, for example, also start typing emulator, you should see this launch emulator option here. And if you choose that, a new window should open.
Pakai emulator. Laptopku nggak kuat anjir kalau pakai emulator.